Well, thank you very much, and thank you to Ben and Barbara for allowing me to be here. I really appreciate it. I want to pull back the curtain just a little bit on what it's like to work with adolescents. Usually when you say 13 to 16, the automatic reaction is, oh, I'm sorry. Ultimately, there's a lot that can be done with cultural preservation and adolescence. The interesting thing is that, I am not a technologist, I'm not an archaeologist. I'm a Canadian with a Scottish father, an English mother who slowly moved to Hawaii. I think if I'm not careful, I'll spend a short stint in Australia and land in Antarctica if I keep going south and west. Ultimately, I'll talk a little bit about Mid-Pacific Institute, where I currently am, but I want to talk mostly about the way that things came together in terms of becoming a technology center with CyArk, but also my stint in California. Of course, none of this would have started, excuse me, if I, like thousands of other people, hadn't seen Ben talk at the TED conference, and it really struck me, the things he spoke about. It wasn't just about the technology, it wasn't about the cultural heritage, it was about a sort of steadfast belief that our future and our past are linked completely together. And not only that, as an educator, I'm responsible for part of an industry that ultimately deals in the currency of generations. We look at individuals like Ben, and we see that that's one person that we've been waiting for to say, would you please show us the way? So the need, much like Ben has described around the world, also exists in California, where I was at the time. In California, we have a variety of different issues. It's a beautiful place. It's also prone to wildfires and pretty devastating earthquakes. For us, the school in which I was working at the time was in Santa Inez, which is the southern part of California. And the teacher that we had been working with specifically had his students already working with handheld GIS devices. They were familiar with the ArcGIS software and Cyclone and a variety of others, which is why when you cold call Liz Lee at CyArk and you say, I'd like to put about $60,000 worth of hardware and software into the hands of adolescents, there's a silent pause at the other end of the phone. But after a quick conversation, she realized that I was serious and that the kids actually could do the things that I said they could do. So as we start focusing in onto my hometown in Santa Barbara, the thing that's really interesting to me is that, and let me go back just for 1 second here, there is a string of 21 missions that were founded by the Spanish missionaries as they worked their way up the coastline in California. And in Santa Barbara, where I was located at the time, one of the missions was known in the local region anyway as sort of a working museum. It's in a place sort of, Santa Barbara's kind of known as North Hollywood. There are a lot of actors that you can see on the streets and various other things, and secretly, while the people in Santa Barbara say it's a real pain, they really do like it. It's nice to know that Warren Beatty's just over there. Part of what we have as an issue, though, is that even though that there are deep resources in a place like Santa Barbara, even though a place like the Mission can look like a working museum, and obviously it has some deep pockets when it comes to restoration and maintenance on an ongoing way, it doesn't mean that you are immune to earthquake, fire, floods, or anything else. So even as far back as 1925, when the earthquake hit Santa Barbara, it took a little while to rebuild, but they were able to rebuild. It doesn't mean, however, that the drawings that were used then are usable now. Codes have changed, a lot of things are newer. So the story changes ever so slightly, though, about 40 kilometers north in Santa Inez, and this is where I come in. So Santa Inez economically is a slightly different place. It's highly agricultural, it's wine country, which is very nice for tourism. As a public school superintendent, I was never able to actually enjoy the wine as well as work. It didn't work out that way for me. But because of all the agriculture and because of the very sort of fluid nature of tourism and the money that came in and out of the community, The resources to rebuild and maintain something as wonderful as this particular mission just simply weren't there. Regularly, what would happen is that students from my school would come and perform maintenance projects, and they would help out. It has an active congregation, but it's a smaller congregation. The students who were working with those handheld GIS units had actually found the original aqueduct located behind the mission and were able to disprove a commonly held theory before in a geoscience journal. And so the students were actually published because they disproved this particular theory, which was a pretty cool thing for students. So when we start getting into becoming a technology center and actually figuring out how to work with all of these things, we get into the tools. We've heard amazing things about the tools so far. We have what is now the older version of the Faro Focus, and we see here a very wonderful student, 16 years old, touching a very expensive piece of equipment. And I have to explain over and over, usually to people, that the kids are very respectful of these things. They know they're important. They know they're not iPhones, and they know that they are not little Xbox handheld controllers that they can toss around. So they are incredibly respectful. Along with the hardware came the software and the suite of software that comes with being a technology center for CyArk. And what you see here are screen captures of the first initial training scans from the actual school itself. This is part of the pilot. So this was the first phase that our students completed, this fly-through of the marker that is in front of the Santa Inez mission and the original bell from the 1804 construction. We believe that because this is high school students entirely scanning and then working in the background to put the software together, that these images are the first to be scanned and uploaded by high school students in the world. I'll accept the applause on the behalf of really cool kids. Our team structure, when we think about working in schools, a high school it's a very rudimentary sort of thing. It has a mechanized daily pattern. There's a number of periods every single day. So our team structure started with the idea first that our teacher, whom you see in the top picture there in the middle, Chip Finenga, very American name, Chip, he's the champion and therefore is the project manager. And it fit perfectly with our particular model of collaboration and innovation with kids, because we want students, and this is worldwide, to have an idea of what it's like to work in industry. Not to work in a silo, not to work by yourself at a desk or with computers and lines so that you don't look sideways, but to work collaboratively in smaller units and then in a larger unit. So out of the many periods that we had in a day, we had 4 to 6 students per period pulled out of their larger class, and the class structure allowed for multi-projects. So that's how that happened. The individuals worked together, and as they did that, one of the side benefits that the teacher and I couldn't think of originally was that of their own volition, they would start meeting after school because they wanted to share their failures and their successes. They wanted to figure out exactly what was going on, and they were able to see from just speaking to each other how to figure out those issues. And their knowledge base grew exponentially over a period of about 6 to 8 weeks. It was amazing to watch. It should also be noted, we have, I just love looking at the kids at the bottom. It should also be noted, of the students, so we're talking about 20 students, as a pilot, the academic ranges for the groups varied from one end of the spectrum to the other. We had AP and honors students. We had students who were in agriculture. As I mentioned, the school was in an agricultural area. So girls, mostly they were the girls who were working with their animals, would literally come in dusty. They were very dusty, having just worked with cows and pigs, and they would dive right into the software. And we had another student who was a special education student. He had reading comprehension issues and some difficulty with math, but he was spatially gifted. So this particular guy could get into the software and he became the expert. He was the one who could figure out all the points and how to stitch everything together, and it's amazing. Technology becomes the great equalizer. So when we started this whole thing out, because there were no other schools to go to for models, we kind of put everything together in a way that was more cyclical and fluid rather than linear. So here you see kind of the way in which we went through the whole pattern. The first phase in terms of conceptual planning was simply the question, can we actually be a CyArk technology center? We want to make sure that we represent CyArk as well as we represent our students. And so after initially figuring out all of those things, we had to look internally and do a quick little assessment of ourselves. Did we have the infrastructure, the technology backbone? We wanted to make sure that we had capacity with our personnel. And that meant from our CFO, in terms of who would actually sign a PO that, you know, would total up ultimately to about $80,000, all the way down through me, the principal of the school, the teacher, and ultimately the students. No hiccups allowed. And then beyond that, we thought about the actual identification of projects. Would we go with multiple projects of smaller scope so that we could find easier success, or would we go with one major project? And ultimately, because it was the Santa Inez mission, we went with one larger project. The community outreach, we learned is very important. CyArk was very helpful for us in that regard, that when it comes to reaching out to the community, not only do you have to have a good case statement to explain why this is important, and there's nothing better than the thought that we don't have enough time to physically preserve the world's structures. There's your urgency. And so the nice thing for us in Santa Inez is that not only, I don't know if it's nice, but we were living on a fault line. So from this case statement, there was a sense of urgency. And traditionally, a large earthquake would happen between every 27 to 50 years, and we're at about year 40 in Santa Inez. So, you know, the conspiracy theorists are alive and well. So our case statements were developed, and then from there we had to look at exploratory interest, and we found great interest in our community for support. And then of course, if we're going to be successful, we had to figure out a phased plan. Funding, funding, funding. It always comes down to funding. Ultimately for us, I was incredibly fortunate because in Santa Inez, which is in Santa Barbara County, there is a huge push to pull together industry and public sectors. And so we were able to obtain a local $80,000 grant, mostly from a consortium of individuals who represented industry. They understood that students who build skills that are for college, but more importantly for college and beyond, realize that an infusion of capital to the tune of $80,000 isn't that much money when you look at the broader scope, especially when in our model we have students training students. It's an incredible place to be. This is the end of the first phase. We did the pilot that you saw earlier with the marker. This is a fulling and grist mill that is located behind the mission, and this is the one that was archived originally with the handheld GIS devices. And so this fly-through shows that the work of our students and some very patient parents who were able to drive out with a variety of different ropes and various other things to get them down in there. It just shows that it can be done, and all by 16 and 17-year-olds.
But first, a horrific incident a world away is inspiring a group of students.
There, we'll go back. So media outreach, and the media is the next one, if you recall my cycle. As you go along, any funding comes from great discussion, and especially when you build a lot of energy. And today and yesterday are great examples of great energy. And so I just want to show you a media clip that shows the culmination of all of this, and we'll talk a little bit after.
But first, a horrific incident a world away is inspiring a group of students here at home. It happened 12 years ago when the Taliban destroyed the Buddhas of Afghanistan. That act of intolerance helped push Santa Inez Valley Union High School to take on a remarkable task: help archive the missions of California. News Channel 3 reporter Beth Farnsworth explains.
In seconds, a millennia of history wiped out. They were called sandstone Buddhas. The Taliban called them forbidden idols and blew them up. Religious relics dating back to the year 507.
Just spins really fast, man.
In 2013, a new generation using new technology in hopes of preventing that from ever happening again.
Which essentially is using lasers to determine range. It sends a laser beam out, measures distance, and we can apply photographs to it to create a 3D model of any structure that we'd like.
The technology is called Lidar, created by an engineer outraged at what the Taliban did. Santa Inez High School came up with the $80,000 it cost and is the only school in the world to have it.
That's got it.
It's going to start out pointing that way towards the mission, and the little mirror is spinning right now.
These students from Chip Fananga's class are making a 3D model of the Santa Inez mission, every inch of it, from the exterior facade
To close the door, or do we want the door open?
to the interior niches and wooden beams.
The inside is going to be killer because all the windows up on top are their own little rooms, so we're going to have to scoot over, scan the window, scoot over, scan the window, scoot over, scan the windows.
The Santa Inez mission sign was the students' first project. It took them an hour and a half to do 10 scans, then another 2 hours to download that information into the computer. So just gives you a small sense of how long it will take to scan the entire mission.
And then if you scroll across, you can see there's us in the back, so this part will all be cut out.
And that all happens back on campus, where the scanning information is downloaded on a classroom computer.
And the nice thing about this is that these ghosts are easy to take out. All of these are just points.
Ryan and Alyssa explained that every single dot on the screen is a laser point, millions of them to create a 3D model you can fly through. The detail is amazing. You can read signs and see cracks in the floor. The technology even creates pictures like this one of a historic mill in Solvang.
If there was a natural disaster, an earthquake, and this whole place fell down, these scans would be used to help rebuild it again, and they're accurate to under a millimeter, so it would be exactly as it was, and just need to be a part of it.
Santa Inez is just the start. These students will also map the Santa Barbara mission. Others will use the technology to map the rest.
I'm going into engineering next year, so I feel like this technology would be helpful in like manufacturing or sizing parts and being able to see if those parts fit together properly.
Scanners, it rotates around.
Fananga says he doesn't know who is more excited about this project, the students or him, or the rest of the world, once they see all of California's missions in 3D. In Santa Inez, Beth Farnsworth, News Channel 3.
And the best part, you can tell the kids will love it. All right.
So when you hear a student say pretty much verbatim everything that we've heard today and yesterday, you think as a teacher, okay, did a pretty good job there, that was all right. But more importantly, the best part is that we have the idea of younger generations looking up, right? And so what we're usually talking about are the older generations, my generation, the boomers who preceded me, looking down and saying, we have to do these things for the youngers. It's actually the opposite. They get it. So the conceptual planning phase all the way through funding and media, it's never as simple as this. It's not linear. It's not cyclical either. Sometimes you move one ahead. Sometimes you move one back. But for us in our project, that's the way it went. Now, the benefits are plentiful, and yes, it has to do with cultural and historic preservation. We've heard about some of the other issues in terms of other industries and other sectors in which this particular technology can be placed. For me, I think that's the biggest thing for education right now. Using technology for purpose is first. We use ethics in what we do and how we produce individuals who will be fantastic sort of adults in the world. But ultimately, it's the idea that technology is never stuck in a silo. It will be used in other ways, and that's where we come in. So when you think about working with schools, as I said at the beginning, we're sort of pulling the curtain back on this. Schools are really a renewable workforce over and over and over. We deal in the preparation of adults who will ultimately join your industry. Some may be archaeologists, some may be scientists or artists, But the idea is that if we expose them at an early age to things that are accessible and understandable and have an impact, that is where the foundation is laid. And so if we can even at a school develop perhaps 5 archaeologists that never would have thought of it before, then we're 5 times better than we were originally. In terms of collaboration and the way that we do things, we really do focus on a project-based environment, as I had mentioned before, to the point where the school I'm currently in at Mid-Pacific Institute, there's a local engineering firm who is coming to us to look at the way that we position kids physically in rooms, the way that we have them working in teams, and they're restructuring their office to mimic the way that our classroom looks. It's a pretty cool place to be. And ultimately, as I had mentioned, the generational issue, my point at the bottom, we have 2 generations sitting in a school right now, in any school in the world. You have millennials, who the youngest year of the millennials are 9-year-olds, my daughter, for example. And then beyond, the next generation are looking up. And they have a tie into making the world a better place. And so technology gives them that advantage. So here's a case study of my current school. I've moved from California to Hawaii, which is a real burden to bear. It's very difficult. We have a school that is preschool through 12th grade, 1,500 students or a little more. And it's multimodal in terms of its focus and its interests. We're not just a STEM school, science, technology, engineering, and math. We're also a school of the arts. We send kids regularly to highly placed colleges of the arts, including Juilliard. We are an international baccalaureate school, and our preschool is an internationally acclaimed Reggio Emilia model preschool as well. For us, I think the next phase of what we do should rely entirely on how we interact with the community. And I'm very happy to say that we will be a technology center for CyArk in the very near future. The PO, the purchase order, still is wet with my signature on it. And in order for us to interact with our community, the technology, as I've mentioned a couple of times now, is what opens that door. And we want to focus on environmental and spatial technologies in particular. And the vehicle that we will use includes coding, 3D scanning, and 3D printing. For me, I believe that in the traditional sense, schools are supposed to produce students who are ready for college, and that includes foreign languages. But I find it interesting that we don't acknowledge coding, computer coding, as a foreign language. And interestingly, everything that we touches the cloud sooner or later. So that's something that we're going to get into very shortly. We have near examples and immediate examples of things that need preservation in terms of the Hawaiian Islands. I won't read the list there, but I'll just mention very briefly that the 3 ladies in the picture were students at the very beginning of World War II and were actually arrested on our campus because they had to be taken to an internment camp. I didn't expect that, sorry. We have multiple benefits in terms of what I think could be done for schools. Partnerships not only with great people like Ben and Barbara, but ultimately you have engineering, medical sciences, conservation, and all the way down the line. And ultimately, that's the story, and it's a good story. So, thank you.